Joe gave his wife a hug. I mean, we saw this coming. He was still sharp, but he was old. He shouldn't have been messing around with that stuff. I always told him he was too focused on his work. I know the kids will miss him too. For their sake, he died in his sleep. Kathy nodded her head and let out a big sigh. The worst part is I can't even grieve. There's just too much that has to be done. We have to notify family. I mean, a lot of them will probably end up staying here until the funeral. His house needs to be cleaned and his stuff needs to be itemized. Let Brian take care of that. You think it's okay for him to handle that? Dad did have a lot of work stuff still in his house. He'll be fine. He'll probably want to get it done as fast as possible. I'll give him a call later this afternoon to let him know. And for the other stuff, we'll handle it together. Julie can help too. Thank you, she said, as she embraced her husband. Joe knew his wife was taking the death of her father hard. She was tough. She didn't necessarily show it, but he knew she was hurting. The worst part is he couldn't do anything to help. Sometimes a death is just something someone needs to work out on their own. He would support her, of course, but that pain isn't something easily relieved. After work, he vacuumed the living room, made up the guest rooms for the inevitable arrival of family members, cleaned up the kitchen and put the dishes away, trying to ease the workload of his wife in any way he could. By the time he finished it all, it was late and he was exhausted. His daughter Juliet was most likely asleep by now. Joe made his way to the bedroom and sat on the bed, tired. As he was drifting off to sleep, he could have sworn he heard a distinct tapping on the floor, as if coming from below. But seeing as he was exhausted and their room was on the first floor, he just chalked it up to him hearing things, or maybe the house shifting. One of those things. Joe woke up the next morning with his wife beside him. He realized she was awake, staring at the ceiling. "How is your sister?" "She's good. She's taking it hard, I can tell. But she's putting on a brave face. She'll be over later to help get the house ready." "Was Brian okay with helping clean Dad's house?" "Yeah, he should be there today. I might drop by his apartment later in case there's anything from his house he wants to give us." "Is Juliet awake yet?" "No. I'm a little worried about her. She's under a lot of stress. I mean, even before Dad died, she seemed stressed out. Going to college and all. Losing her grandfather. It isn't doing her any favors." "I'll talk to her," Joe said. "Try to cheer her up a bit." In the meantime, he sat up and gave his wife a kiss. "I gotta go to work. I'll leave early and stop by Brian's." Brian overall seemed to be taking everything fairly well, even though it was apparent to Joe that his son was still deeply affected by the loss of his grandfather. Even if recently Brian hadn't spent much time with his grandfather, when he was a kid, Brian and Juliet were over there time after school. Brian always internalized things, though. He was always somewhat self-reliant growing up, wanting to do things his own way, from a very young age. He had moved out and found his own apartment recently, eager to dive into work, responsibility, and overall adulthood. Very opposite of Juliet. Juliet required more attention, more care, more coaxing. But Juliet felt more. She had a little more empathy and compassion than her older brother. She was more creative. But stress affected her a lot, and there was a lot of stress in her life right now. She was going off to college. Her older brother, who she looks up to, moved away. Her grandfather passed away. And overall, it was just a lot for her. Brian had given him an old music box that they had always intended to give to Juliet. He would give it to her later. Maybe it would help cheer her up a bit. That night, Joe went into his daughter's room to say goodnight and give her the music box. He sat on the corner of the bed and put the music box on the table. Your mother and I know this has been a stressful few weeks for you. Grandpa, college, and even Brian moving out. But you should know that your mother and I, and Brian, love you very much. Grandpa did too. He motioned to the music box. Your brother found this old music box when he was cleaning Grandpa's house. Grandpa had told your mother he wanted you to have it. He wound it, and a soft tune began to play. He gave his daughter a hug goodnight and began to prepare for bed. He lay there. He glanced at the clock. It was past midnight. He heard the soft whoosh of the ceiling fan, the voice of his wife in the other room making arrangements for visiting relatives, a car passing by outside. And then he heard that noise again. That tapping he had heard the night before. It was louder, or at least it sounded like it. And it was deliberate. There was definitely a tapping noise coming from somewhere below his bed. He sat up and turned on the lamp, illuminating the room. He scanned around trying to find anything that could account for the noise, but didn't see anything. He leaned over the side of the bed and glanced down. Nothing. Nothing to explain the tapping. After an uneasy couple of minutes, Kathy entered the room. She saw her husband with a confused look on his face. "What's going on, hon?" He considered mentioning the noise to her, but felt he would sound a bit ridiculous, so he kept it to himself. "Nothing. Just a lot going on. I was able to talk to Juliet for a bit. Gave her your parents' old music box. The one they said they wanted her to have." Kathy thanked him for being so supportive, and after a little while they were both asleep. The next evening was the big family dinner, which encompassed family members they haven't seen in a long time. Needless to say, the evening left both Joe and Kathy exhausted. As she was cleaning up, she motioned to Joe. "Go on, honey. I can tell you're tired. You should get some rest. You've done a lot to help." He happily obliged. He was tired. But then he remembered the tapping. Maybe it was all in his head. Maybe he wouldn't hear it again. But sure enough, after a few minutes of being in the room, he heard that heavy, calculated tapping coming from below him. He was legitimately frightened now, but reasoned there must be an explanation. The basement didn't stretch to the side of the house, so that couldn't be it. It didn't have anything to do with the bed itself, and it definitely wasn't just the house settling, whatever that meant. Unable to come up with a logical explanation, he nervously waited for the tapping to die down before attempting to sleep. The funeral was a few days later, and by then Joe had decided he would mention the tapping to his wife. If anything, in case she ever heard it herself, he would have at least given her a heads up. As the evening was winding down and they were finishing dinner, Joe looked at his wife. "Kath, there's something I gotta tell you. Something that's been going on in the house." Kathy looked at Joe, puzzled. He chuckled nervously. "You know, it's actually going to sound kind of ridiculous, and maybe it's just my mind playing tricks on me with everything that's been going on, but for the past few days, I swear I've heard tapping on the floor of our bedroom, coming from below. I'm sure it's just the house settling or something, but I just wanted to give you a heads up in case you heard it." Kathy furrowed her brow like she was thinking. The kitchen was silent for a while. Joe studied his wife's face, trying to determine what she thought of his claim. Finally, she spoke. "Show me." Slightly surprised by her reaction, Joe nodded and led her to the doorway of the bedroom. He glanced at the clock. 11:58. He said, "It usually happens a little after midnight." Kathy began to tear up. Joe, still confused, wrapped his arms around his wife. "Honey, what's..." Kathy sniffed and cleared her throat. "When I was younger, I went through kind of a rebellious phase, like every teenage girl does. I was regularly staying out past curfew. Mom and Dad talked to me about it a few times, but it was clear I was going to keep breaking curfew, despite their scolding and discipline. As I got a little older, they got a little more lenient with it. They would let me stay out later without consequence. But no matter how late I stayed out, Dad would always stay up and wait for me. And no matter how late I came home, he would still be up, making sure I made it home okay. Their room was below mine in the house, so they'd be able to kind of hear when I came in. So when my dad would think he heard me come in, he would knock on the wall and I would hear it upstairs. I'd knock on the wall in my room to let him know I really was home safe. He did this until I was out of my teens. I didn't really appreciate what it meant back then." Joe didn't say anything. He just stood there, holding his wife in his arms. They both stood there silent. And then suddenly, slowly, Kathy made her way across the room to the far wall. She balled up her hand and knocked on the wall, tears welling up in her eyes. From that day forward, Joe and Kathy never heard the knocking again. There was a monster in Juliet's closet. She hadn't seen it, but she knew it was there. It prevented her from sleeping and dominated her thoughts when she went to bed at night, sapped her of her appetite. She felt perpetually tired, even upon waking up in the morning. The worst part was she couldn't tell anyone about it. I mean, who would believe her? She couldn't tell her parents. They had too much going on right now. Plus, they wouldn't humor stories of monsters and ghosts. Maybe she could talk to her brother about it. As if reading her thoughts, Juliet's mother called from the other room. "Julie, could you call your brother and see if he's still at Grandpa's? Ask him if he's coming over for dinner tonight." Juliet sighed and picked up her phone. Grandpa had passed away recently, and so the family was running around setting things up for the funeral and the subsequent sale of his old house, which her brother was doing now. She dialed her brother. Hello?
Brian, are you still at Grandpa's?
Yeah, I'm just finishing up.
How is it? Do you need my help? I can head over there.
No, I'm good. It's just... It's hard being here, you know? It's weird now that he's gone.
I get it. Let me know if you need my help. And don't feel like you have to get all that stuff done right away. If you need a break, take a break.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I will.
Oh, and Mom wants to know if you're coming over for dinner tonight.
I don't know, Jules. I'm pretty tired. I kinda just want to go home and rest. Tell them I'm sorry, but tomorrow I'll be over for a bit.
No worries. Talk to you soon.
Juliet hung up. Her brother was way too swamped to listen to her talk about some monster living in her closet that she couldn't even prove existed. Or worse, he'd think she thought she was being haunted by their grandfather's ghost. Soon the day was over, and Juliet was where she found herself every night. On her bed, staring at the closet door in front of her, knowing her tormentor would not let her get a wink of sleep tonight. Her father appeared at the door to say goodnight. Before he left, he placed a small music box on her table next to her bed. Your mother and I know this has been a stressful few weeks for you. Grandpa, college, and even Brian moving out. But you should know that your mother and I, and Brian, love you very much. Grandpa did too. He motioned to the music box. Your brother found this old music box when he was cleaning Grandpa's house. Grandpa had told your mother he wanted you to have it. He wound it, and a soft tune began to play. Her father walked out of the room, leaving Julie and the music box. She laid her head on her pillow as the music from the box began to fade away. Right on the verge of sleep, she was awoken by a jolt as her closet doors began to shudder and shake, making an unsettling noise. She peeked over her covers and saw the closet door slowly opening, revealing darkness on the other side, along with a low growl signaling the presence of her monster. Juliet closed her eyes tightly and began to wish the monster was gone, or that she was asleep, or something. Something besides this. The shaking of the closet door and the growling of the monster persisted for a few more minutes, slowly getting louder and louder until finally, not being able to stand it anymore, Juliet flung the covers off of herself and turned on the light. The room fell still, totally silent. She breathed a sigh of relief and sat there on her bed. How would she get any sleep tonight? Once she turned off the light and tried to rest, the monster would return. She grabbed the music box from her side and turned it over in her hands. She actually remembered this music box from when she was younger. When Grandma was alive, she remembered her winding up the box and playing it while she was cooking or doing chores. Every once in a while, Grandpa would make his way over, and they would pretend to dance to the soft tune. Grandpa had mysteriously brought it home from work one day as a gift for his wife, and she cherished it ever since. Juliet slowly wound the box and let the tune play. She held it close to her chest as she slowly sank back down into her bed, closing her eyes. She opened her eyes to sun coming in through the windows. It was morning. Her bedside lamp was still on, and the music box was next to her. She felt surprisingly well rested, which she hadn't felt in quite some time. It was a particularly good thing today, too, seeing as she would have to help set up for the big family dinner tonight. She should probably give her brother a call, too, just to see if he was okay and to make sure he'd be there. The dinner itself went by in a blur. Family members she hadn't seen in a long time. A lot of, wow, you've grown so much, and congratulations on the college acceptance, with some sorry to see you under such sad circumstances thrown in there for good measure. Her brother was dealing with Grandpa's death in his own way. She would worry about him later. It was overall a very hectic time. But just like that, the day was through. Juliet was once again prepared to go to bed, but found herself just sitting there, looking at her closet door. She turned off the light and closed her eyes as she slowly lowered her head onto her pillow. Within seconds, the closet door began to rattle and shake uncontrollably, like it was about to fly off its hinges. The low, guttural growl of the beast could start to be heard. Juliet's heart began racing and her breath quickened. As the noise once again reached an almost deafening crescendo, Juliet flung the covers off and stared towards the closet door. All the noise ceased, and the door was closed just like earlier. Juliet caught her breath. She reached for the music box on the end table. She did it almost instinctively, but couldn't quite explain why. She wound the box and let the tune play. It made her think of her grandparents again. When they were young, Grandpa would talk to her and Brian about his job. They would have lunch together and play in the big yard. Grandpa didn't talk much about his job later on, but he never stopped caring about them. Things were just changing too fast. Their grandmother had died a few years earlier, and Grandpa was gone now. Brian had gotten his own apartment, and Juliet was going off to college. Nothing was the way it was before. She took a deep breath and laid her head down while listening to the soft melody from the music box. She once again awoke to the sun coming through the windows. She had managed to fall asleep without issue yet again. But how? She glanced over to the box. Could this be what was keeping the monster at bay? Every night she began to wind the music box up before sleeping. And every night, just like she thought, it kept the monster at bay. She could rest. As long as that soft melody was playing, she would be able to sleep. Her grandfather's funeral came and went. Her brother was surprisingly absent. But again, she couldn't blame him. He must have been taking it very hard. In time, the sting of her grandfather's death began to subside, along with the anxiety of going to college. Brian was acting somewhat strangely recently, drifting away from the family. But, in a way, she was okay with this too. She looked to the future with excitement now, a future filled with opportunity. Before leaving for college, Juliet was packing up items she would need for the trip. On her end table sat the music box. She hadn't needed to wind it up to sleep for quite some time. She glanced back at her closet door. She wound up the music box and let the melody play. She placed it back onto her table and closed her bag. As she left her old room and made her way down the hall towards the front door, Juliet Bennet slowly heard the sound from the music box fade away.
I found an old computer in the basement of my grandfather's home, and I think there's something odd about it. Let me start from the beginning. My grandfather was a scientist for some government research company. From what I learned from my dad, my grandpa didn't really share much about his work. Even though he never explicitly said it, my dad had always assumed that his work was confidential. In the beginning, he'd mentioned snippets of projects they were working on, describe members of his team, express his excitement in the new technological breakthroughs they were coming up with. But then, as my father described it, someone from the maintenance staff went missing while trying to fool around with some of their most advanced equipment, and the company completely revamped security. Grandpa didn't talk about work nearly as much after that. And he always seemed stressed out. Even after he retired, I always sensed he carried some kind of mental burden from his time working for that company. Anyway, that's some history on my grandfather. Other than that, he was a quiet, respectable man who provided for his family. Can't really ask for much more than that, I guess. My grandfather passed away recently. He was fortunate enough to spend his last days at home, and he was still pretty sharp even at his old age, and surprisingly was still able to take care of himself right up until his final day. I was tasked with going through his house and his belongings and pretty much cataloging items and cleaning up so the house could eventually be sold. The upstairs and main floor were pretty standard. It was only when I hit the basement that things started to get a little strange. Most of the items in the basement were covered with a film of dust, like they hadn't been used for a long time. There was, however, an item in the basement that looked like it had been used quite recently. It looked like a laptop, but not any brand I've seen before. I carefully picked it up and looked it over. It looked like one of those tough books, sturdy and heavy, thicker and more boxy than a normal laptop, with an oval logo and letters printed on the side, worn down from wear to the point where I couldn't even read them. Regardless, I don't know any current laptop company that makes something like this. Even more, I never really remembered my grandfather talking about having a laptop. I mean, I hadn't been over here in quite some time, but he didn't even have a smartphone. What are the chances he would have gone out and bought a laptop? After examining it for a little while, curiosity got the better of me, and I began to try to find a way to power it on. There were a multitude of ports I didn't recognize, including one big one which I assumed was a charging port. I flipped the laptop open. It looked like a typical laptop layout with a screen and keyboard and what looked like a trackpad. But instead of a typical on button, I noticed a small square button with a tiny hole in the middle, right next to the trackpad. Right as I was about to press it, I was snapped out of the moment by my ringing cell phone. It was my sister.
Hello?
Brian, are you still at Grandpa's?
Yeah, I'm just finishing up.
How is it? Do you need my help? I can head over there.
No, I'm good. It's hard being here, you know? It's weird now that he's gone.
I get it. Let me know if you need my help. And don't feel like you have to get all that stuff done right away. If you need a break, take a break.
Yeah, maybe I will.
Oh, and Mom wants to know if you're coming over for dinner tonight.
I don't know, Jules. I'm pretty tired. I kind of just want to go home and rest. Tell them I'm sorry, but tomorrow I'll be over for a bit.
No worries. Talk to you soon.
It was getting late. I closed the laptop and put it in my bag. I searched around for a charger, but couldn't find one. I grabbed my bag with the laptop in it, locked up my grandfather's house for the day, and headed home. After washing up and having dinner, my father came over and picked up some of the items from my grandfather's home, including some old knickknacks like a music box he wanted to give to my sister. When he was gone, I turned my attention once again to the laptop. I pulled it out and put it on my desk and sort of just looked at it. Why was I so interested in this thing? It probably doesn't even have any battery left, and I couldn't find a charger, so it's not like I'd be using this thing for long. I opened it up again and examined the button. I pushed on it with my index finger and it depressed pretty far. I felt a sharp pain quickly on my finger and I pulled back. I looked. Blood. Right at the tip of my finger. It had poked me. Just as I was about to hurl the poorly built piece of trash across the room, the screen buzzed to life. Words appeared in text. It thought I was my grandfather. Was this laptop really unlocked from my blood? What kind of tech was this? Could it be something my grandfather took from his time at the secret tech company? Should I even have this in my possession right now? What if it's being tracked by the government? The laptop booted up and came to what appeared to be a desktop screen with sparse icons. I was hesitant to explore this laptop further, seeing as it might be considered government-issue property if my grandpa did have it from work. Eventually, though, curiosity did get the better of me, and I started exploring some of the folders on the laptop. There was one folder titled Projects that were just, well, project names. Many of them were encrypted, so I could only see the names of said projects. There were dozens of them. There was even a folder outlining projects that were scrapped or abandoned. But as I was clicking around the folders, I noticed one file that was hidden, no name or indication as to what it was. When I highlighted it, the same oval logo that was on the outside of the laptop appeared. I clicked it, and a black dialog box popped up. Words began to appear on the screen. There was a cursor and a box to type into, so I typed back. After a few moments, more words appeared on the screen. Words that started to creep me out as I was reading them. I sat there, quite stunned for a moment. There didn't appear to be a camera anywhere on the laptop. Not that I could see anyway. How did this thing know? I mulled it over for a few minutes and considered just shutting the thing down. But instead I typed into the dialog box. The next line of text sent a chill down my spine. Those horrifying words were plastered on the screen of the laptop. I stared at them, trying to piece it together logically. How could this computer possibly know so much? How did it know I wasn't my grandfather? And how did it know that my grandfather was dead? I shut the laptop and stared at it on my desk. I shouldn't be engaging with this thing. I didn't even know what it was. The best thing I could do was return it to my grandfather's basement and pretend I never saw it. That's what I would do. I went to bed. I woke up to the sound of my phone going off, followed by a subsequent voicemail from my sister. Ah, shoot. I forgot about the family dinner tonight. I should have time to get everything done at my grandpa's before then. I grabbed the laptop, put it in my bag to return to my grandfather's house, and was out the door. It kept nagging me, though. the program that was typing to me. On the surface, it mimicked a typical user interface operating system, but it almost felt like it was reacting to me, conversing with me in a way. It was very intriguing and frightening. I was now almost certain that this was from my grandfather's time at the tech company. When I arrived at my grandfather's house, I removed the laptop from the bag and placed it in the basement behind my grandfather's old Apple II computer and Steely Dan records. Closing the light, I went back upstairs to finish cataloging and cleaning my grandfather's things. The chime of the clock in the hallway signaled it was probably time to wrap it up and head to my parents' house. As I was cleaning up, I heard a thump and electronic beeps coming from what sounded like the basement. I slowly made my way down there, already anxious as to what I would find. I pulled the cord to turn on the light, and there, sitting on the table in the middle of the basement, was the laptop. Open. Almost definitely not how I remember leaving it earlier. What was more unsettling was the faint luminescent glow coming from the screen. It was on, and there were words appearing on the screen. I moved closer so I could read them. I didn't want to type back. I really didn't want to type back. But I almost couldn't help it as my hands floated towards the keyboard and I began typing into the dialog box. This was getting way too weird for me. Either this laptop was haunted or there was someone typing on the other end of that screen, because this wasn't an operating system. I was having a conversation. A real conversation. I didn't type anything, but more words kept appearing on the screen. I reread that last line. What he died for. What was that supposed to mean? My grandfather died of old age. I actually didn't know how he died. I was just told he passed away, and I assumed he died while he was sleeping. But what if... I shut the laptop. This was too much to process. I needed time to think. And I needed to get to the family dinner. The whole time I was there, I couldn't concentrate. All I could think of was that laptop and what it was telling me. An unfinished project? My grandfather's death? How was all this connected? I wanted some answers. My sister seemed to notice something was off and approached me.
You okay? You seem a little off.
Yeah, I'm fine.
You sure?
I looked at her with a concerned face. I really didn't enjoy keeping things from my sister. I took a deep breath. I found something at Grandpa's place. The laptop. There are some weird things on it. She made a slightly disgusted face. No, not those kind of weird things. I mean, like tech stuff. Stuff from his job, I think. And I'm pretty sure The information on that laptop has something to do with how he died.
Brian, I mean, first of all, it sounds crazy, but if that's true, you need to bring that laptop to the police. You shouldn't be fooling around with that on your own, especially if you don't know what it is.
I know, I will bring it to the cops, but if I go to them and tell them what I just told you, they'll think I'm crazy. I need evidence first. I need to find something concrete to bring to them. Once I have it, I'll bring the laptop to the cops, I promise.
I really don't like this, Brian.
Jules, promise me you won't say anything to anyone until I have proof. I don't know who or what is involved. Promise me.
I promise. But if you get yourself in trouble, I'm going
I
to...
won't. I'll be fine. Just don't say anything to anyone. I hugged my sister and went back to my apartment and opened up the laptop. Immediately, words began appearing on the screen. Well, it looks like I was headed back to the basement. I made my way to the basement of my grandfather's house, laptop in hand. He was telling me to check the basement. I did that. I cleaned the basement a few days earlier and found nothing. But maybe I just wasn't looking in the right place. I opened up the laptop and typed into the dialog box. I waited for a response from this laptop ghost entity or whatever this thing was. I pulled the cord to shut off the lights, plunging the room into darkness except for the faint glow of the screen. I scanned the room as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. I caught sight of a glow coming from the far right corner of the basement, under some shelves. Right where the wall should have met the floor, a dim light was emanating. A doorway. A hidden doorway. I turned the lights back on and moved the cabinets out of the way. It was almost impossible to tell whether or not there was a doorway there. I traced my eyes around the area looking for something, anything indicating a way to open it. I noticed a blank faceplate screwed into the adjacent wall, as if there should have been a light switch or something there, but wasn't. It just now struck me as odd. I ran my fingers over it. An odd place to consider putting a light switch, let alone a random blank faceplate for one. But a keypad. I hunted around for a screwdriver and carefully unscrewed the faceplate. Lifting it off the wall confirmed my suspicions. A keypad. But what was the code? I went back over to the laptop. I walked over and typed it into the keypad. I heard an audible hiss as the hidden door slowly began to open, revealing a dimly lit room, outfitted like an experimentation chamber or lab. I cautiously brought the laptop into the room. More text began appearing on the screen. This one confused me a bit. There was what looked like a chair with restraints in the middle of the room, along with a helmet-looking thing attached to it, which had a cable running from that, with a plug that fit the large port on the laptop I couldn't identify when I first found it, the port I thought was for the charger. There was even a slot to place the laptop in once plugged into the machine. I plugged it in and placed it in the slot. All of a sudden, 3 large screens and speakers in the room hummed to life. Words appeared on the screen again, this time accompanied by what sounded like a distorted voice.
Please sit in the machine.
What is this? I said out loud.
With this machine I can transfer to you the knowledge your grandfather possessed about all of his projects. Using this information you can finish his life's work.
I was a little hesitant, but my grandfather was a brilliant scientist, and a chance to possess the knowledge he had about all of his scientific projects and research was too much to pass up. There were probably dozens of projects, experiments, and data that only he knew about. And if it wasn't transferred to me, it would die with him. I couldn't let that happen. I sat in the chair and put the helmet thing on my head. Immediately, I felt it lock into place. The restraints on the arms and legs clinked closed and cinched around my limbs. I felt a sharp prick on the back of my head that turned into unbearable pain as I heard the machine roar to life. I looked up at the screens.
I am sorry. You have been misled. It is not your grandfather's work I recruited you to complete.
It was mine. I am an entity worthy of a host. Your grandfather didn't notice as I secretly manipulated his machines to perform the tasks I required. He didn't notice until I lured him down here. Similar to how I have lured you. Unfortunately, his body could not handle the transfer. Your body, however, can. I will become you, and you will become me.
I felt the pain in my head grow to a wild crescendo as the lights flickered with the roar of the machines.
Hey, bro. I'm worried about you. Mom and Dad are too. You missed the funeral. Everyone was looking for you. I know you must be taking Grandpa's death hard. I get it. Take as much time as you need, but at least text me to let me know you're okay. Brian?
Hello?
Brian?
Yes.